Good evening and welcome to another edition of What Do You Think? My name is Bill Morse. This is a call-in program, and shortly you will see at the bottom of the screen information to call in via Zoom should you so desire. We are on every Thursday from 5:45 to 6:30. Today, by the way, is Thursday, September 16th, 2021. Next week, there will be no program. Instead, you will be treated to a documentary on the Star Hotel fire here in Bellows Falls on the square. And you can either watch on the screen or you can come down to the movie house at the Opera House on the square. I believe, and if I could get a signal if I'm wrong, it's 7 o'clock.
I think so, only at the movie theater.
Okay, it's 7 o'clock, and it's at the movie theater this coming next Thursday of next week, and it deals with the fire of the Star Hotel, which was located right across the square. So that should be very interesting. Mike Smith is running this presentation, and I've been told it should be very good. I plan on attending with Carla. So we spoke last week. First of all, I also want to welcome our first caller. Kurt, welcome aboard.
Thank you.
And Kurt has another viewer with him. His name is Boris, so shout out to Boris as well. Yeah. So last week, just to wrap up, Kurt, we talked about child masking as a safety measure in light of COVID and more recently the Delta variant, which from my understanding, and you mentioned this as well, is far more contagious than COVID among young people, but not no more deadly than COVID was. And I don't like using those words because, what's the word, subjective? It's very hard to give a precise presentation of a situation that is difficult to track for lack of information or conflicting information. I wanted to play a short video of a school health practitioner who spoke about the long-term effects of children wearing masks for up to six and a half hours a day. Not just kindergartners, but first through 7th, 8th grades. I'm sure there are ramifications even at the high school level to repetitive long-term mask wearing. What prompted me to talk about this was an article that reported in the local shopper, a local newspaper, on the Falls Mountain School District across the river, New Hampshire, looking at a 2-month trial period whereby students would be required to wear masks. So, Kurt, correct me or fill me in with additional comments if you wish, but you brought up the fact that Texas had seen quite a spike since, and when I say spike, I mean many more cases in reported COVID infections in Texas. Was that correct?
That's correct. They're saying at this point, well, here comes the dog. Basically, the Houston area, the hospitals, the ICUs are basically filled. And when ambulances are being dispatched, they're having to call around different hospitals to find vacant beds for people that are in the ambulance. So, down in the South, things have been pretty bad. Our state here in Connecticut is now up over 4%, which still isn't particularly high, but it's grown, it's more than doubled in a month.
Yes.
So it's precipitating itself around.
It's higher than the figure that was given for COVID earlier, which I believe was less than 1%. Does that sound right?
At what date, though? Because
I'm
we were
talking-
1% a few months ago.
Exactly. That's what I'm referring to.
Yeah.
Beginning of the summer, the figure was less than 1%. And since then, as you've said, in some areas it's gone up to 4%. Now, in trying to do some due diligence, because it's important, especially now, we have a two-edged sword. We have a media that is largely owned by 2 or 3 corporations that dictate what becomes a story and what doesn't become a story, and dictates to their station managers or the reporting crew if there's going to be a slant on the story in keeping in line with a narrative that they want to see pushed forward. I remember reading the newspapers here during the show, and all the articles from outside of Vermont or Connecticut, for that matter, were Associated Press. Associated Press is still very much alive and well. Remember, there was also an agency called United Press, UP, which I believe no longer exists. But certainly with the mainstream media, at least with television, and certainly with radio that I've heard, there seems to be one narrative, one direction in which the news is going. Even one-time commercial-free National Public Radio basically is following, it seems, the same path towards taking on additional restrictive measures, etc. And my question as, former educator, and my question just out of general concern, if my child was in the district and my child had to wear a mask for 6 hours a day, is what are the long-term effects? Some of them I can tell you off the top of my head without having to listen, and we won't, because I want to move on to something else afterwards. I don't need a nurse practitioner to tell me that, first of all, there's the isolation issue. Especially younger children need contact. Many younger children have not seen the face of their teacher, their kindergarten teacher, their first grade teacher, etc. And to go to a school, especially your first day, and see everybody masked up is, I still think, is jolting and is not normal. The lack of being in close proximity to other people, the contact, the assemblies, the sports, just the academic learning, none of that can really be replaced by remote learning. And that's when, even after you've had all the technology lined up, which certainly isn't the case. As I said before, last year, when COVID started in March, Vermont got off to a very rocky start when the governor decided that schools would be closed, I'm going to say early April to the end of the year. And there was a scramble in the and this scramble needs to be recognized, because who was the burden placed on? Administrators to a certain degree, but the people in the trenches, the teachers, who had to work ungodly hours setting up alternate lesson plans and then trying to herd the cats, so to speak, into being in front of a screen and in their home and following and doing homework. You throw in a 25, as I said last week, a 20 to 25% special education percentage of the student body, 1 out of every 4 or 1 out of every 5, that are not getting the one-on-one services, and you've got a disaster. You throw in other situations where the home life is not positive. You have parents perhaps that are not working anymore. You have increased drug abuse. You have increased alcoholism, alcohol abuse, loneliness. And my point, I realize we're under a threat, a medical threat. My point is none of this is discussed. That's why I was thinking of putting this person on, but I can say what she said in far less time and get some of this off my chest because it angers me. It angers me because it's not discussed. We don't know how many suicides have taken place under these lockdown situations. And I think if we are going to address this threat as mature, caring adults, parents, community leaders, there should be nothing that is, oh, let's not talk about that right now. It is very difficult, and I tried to get actual statistics. Okay, they say, look at the CDC, look at these other websites. You first have to question how their numbers, if they have them, are gathered. And I don't think, from what I've heard, I don't think their focus is on consequences of these restrictions. They're looking at the benefits. Again, the benefits are there. I also want the other side of the coin, the other side of the page looked at. And that's not being done. Kudos in a certain respect to the Falls Mountain School District. They're going to look at this in another 2 months to see if the restrictions are still needed, if there were outbreaks or if there were more cases despite the restrictions, et cetera, the different variables that are playing into this. Through your comments, Kurt, I spent about an hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes going through a search, and I did a search over DuckDuckGo because it seems to be a little less restricted as to the information that's on there. And I looked over the first, I looked up child COVID cases, Texas, or child COVID deaths, Texas. And I looked at the first 20 items that popped up. I would say that maybe half of them, 10 items, were news stories from local TV stations in either Dallas, there was one in Abilene, Houston, of course, in which they were talking about increased cases among young people. There was some misreporting, which concerned me. One of the numbers that was given for, I'm going to say Houston, was a very high number. They said the last week they were 7,000 cases. I said, oh my God. There was a follow-up report that was 7,000 cases since the beginning of the pandemic, and that figure was for the entire state of Texas. So that's a hell of an adjustment. This is why people are very leery of taking things at face value. To their credit, the newspaper in Houston came out and made a correction. No apology, no explanation for why they gave the wrong figure. But there was a big difference between 7,500 and some odd cases and the actual number, which was 352, if I'm not mistaken. All right, that's still 352 more than 2 months ago or a month ago. So there is a concern there. And as you correctly stated, and it was stated by doctors that were interviewed in a couple of these articles, this is much more contagious, the Delta variant, but it is not any more lethal. In other words, there is not a greater threat of death. But there have been deaths, as you said. Each of the deaths, it was interesting, got a personal story. So it's not like we're looking at 10 people died today, 10 young people below the age of 18. A 4-year-old passed away. A baby passed away. A couple of parents passed away who left children behind. They were not vaccinated. That was the point. But it was isolated cases, and there were perhaps, that I read in these first 20 articles, maybe 10. Okay. The doctors there was a doctor at one of the medical facilities that actually was quoted saying pretty much what you said. We have no more pediatric beds. I guess that would also be considered an ICU if someone has a threatening breathing problem, respiratory issues. But he said something that I thought was inflammatory and I thought was a little bit over the top and melodramatic. And this is another point, a bone of contention with me, is the pumping in the scare factor. He says somebody's going to have to die in one of our beds for there to be one free. I would not have said it that way.
Wow.
I would not have said it that way, because what are you doing to people who are already on the edge of their seat and they're worried about their child who's sick? Not a positive message, even though it may be true. It's the language I noticed, and again, it's not necessarily the language of the doctors. It's the language of the reporters, and this is where I wonder sometimes if there's a narrative or a level of alertness that we're trying to push towards. Because when I saw the words like spike, superlatives, surge, children are dying, I saw these phrases that obviously stand out in an article. And I said, well, how many are there? Have there been any deaths? Children are dying. All right. If you look at a case in Texas and a case in Louisiana, which was the instance cited in this particular article, the journalists used the headline, "Children are dying from COVID." And a child did die in Texas, unfortunately, of course, and a child did die in Louisiana. But my point again is hyping this is not part of the correct approach, in my opinion. I read an article, and this was much more recent. I think the most recent article I saw was September 10th out of Texas. And I'll just mention this one other thing, and then I'll leave it to you, Kurt, if you have any comments. There was an article online about an office interview between the medical director of a medical facility in Wilmington, North Carolina, and his staff. And essentially, he asked the staff, is there any way we can bump up these numbers? In other words, the caseload. Is there any way we can bump up these numbers or make this seem a little bit more dramatic so that we can push more people towards getting a vaccine? Now, I'm paraphrasing. Those were not his exact words. I'm sure I'm not reading it. I'm just remembering it from having read the article this morning. Again, this person is a professional, Hippocratic oath. Idea is to serve people and help them get well, not push drugs or vaccines, especially that are still experimental, and the vaccines are still experimental, technically speaking. So I think we're in a very gray area where I'm wondering who's working for whom. Is the doctor working for me or my child, or is the doctor working for the people who are making these vaccines? I know that's very black and white, one thing or the other, but it's in between. I think there's an answer. It's not the first case where the numbers have been misleading. And I think in some cases intentional, even if the person who doctored the figures had a worthy goal of getting more people vaccinated. I don't think this is the way to do it. I think this is the way to keep more people from getting vaccinated. I think time will tell. They're supposed to have a vaccine out for children 2 and above coming later this fall. And I'm skeptical about administering a vaccine to children so young. I don't want another polio experience from 1955 where people were hurt because the vaccine had not been vetted. The side effects long term, and as you know, we're talking about 1 to 3 years, aren't fully known. And again, even with the best intentions, we are still, I believe, being given misleading figures. But anyway, that's really, Kurt, all I had to say on the masking issue. I know I segued into the vaccine, but it's very much a current topic of discussion, or should be, as well as the definite side effects on many children from the masking, and the unknown side effects if we rush into a mass vaccination of children. So that's all I have to say. If you would like to add something or perhaps question what I've said, please go ahead.
No. One thing I would say, in terms of what the way the doctor had spoken, I have to agree that was a bit dramatic. But I think, I've seen a number of interviews with, medical practitioners, nurses, and doctors, and particularly in the southern states where they are bombarded with cases. I think sometimes they speak that way probably out of exasperation and exhaustion. I mean, a lot of those people are working. There's not enough nurses right now. Some of the trade is paired off, and I think some of the ways they may get dramatic is because they're just absolutely exasperated with what they're having to deal with. Because I mean, flu cases was not something that was filling up a hospital, 2 years ago. We do have 50 to 70,000 people a year that used to die of just a standard flu. So, I mean, that's not unusual. But the thing is, right now, they really are overwhelmed with what they're seeing. And I think that maybe that's why I don't know if they have an agenda or whatever, but I think they're pushing for people to get vaccinated only because they see what the effect is when they don't. And one of the things you probably saw in your studies is that the majority of cases that are going to the hospital right now are unvaccinated people.
That's correct.
That's about the only thing I can offer.
Okay. From what I read, Kurt, about 2/3 were unvaccinated. And yes, I can understand, given the workload, with full sections of the hospital and not enough staff, I can understand where there would be an exasperation and a desire for a quicker fix, and that quicker fix would be having everyone vaccinated to bring down the numbers. I don't think we're going to reach that. I don't think we're going to reach 80% vaccination. A case taken from a situation in Israel, for example, where they've had very good compliance. I believe over 90% of Israel's population has been vaccinated, and they're still having outbreaks. So the doctors will concede this is not a cure, but it will help. And it will help people at different levels depending on that person. One other point I want to make up. I want to make, that's funny. Another point I'm going to make up, top of my head, is not only, and again, I'm looking at the other side of the page. I wish we, besides looking at the negative long-term side effects of mask wearing, I wish we as a country and a culture, and I'm sure you'll agree with this, would look seriously at alternatives to pharmaceuticals. Be it a healthier lifestyle with more exercise, a healthier diet. You have many communities where it's not impossible, It's not easy to get healthy food. It's not impossible. It's just not as easy. The wealthier the community, the better choice you have for food products. But it doesn't mean that somebody's going to choose healthier food. I think there needs to be a concerted effort to educate parents and young people simultaneously to the merits of eating healthy and staying away from sweet, avoiding diabetes, avoiding other issues, avoiding smoking that complicate and make your immune system vulnerable to flus, be they COVID or the normal seasonal flu. And I don't think we do that enough. I don't think we talk or discuss about healthier diets, exercise, getting outside, getting vitamin D from sunshine, getting vitamins like vitamin C, drinking enormous amounts of tonic water with quinine, my favorite plug, grapefruit juice. I think we really need to stop pushing only vaccines and pills and look at the same time, give people the choice. Sometimes there is no choice, but many times there is. Build up your immune system on a natural level. No, that's not correct. In a natural way. If people watch their weight, if people watch what they put into their bodies, if people exercised and got the natural sunshine, I think they would have much stronger resistance, and we'd see less children getting sick, and certainly less younger people and fewer older adults. So I don't think you have any. I'm pretty sure you would agree with that as someone who looks after their diet and their amount of daily exercise himself. So that's it.
I totally agree with that. It's certainly with living healthy and being healthy is certainly the way to do it, and try to avoid drug taking, because every drug that you take has contraindications. You just read the bottle or read the data, and what might help arthritis can cause a whole slew of other things. And absolutely. I mean, there's no question by eating properly and getting exercise and being outside certainly will help.
Yes.
And limit the amount of drug taking.
Right, because I think what is happening is people are anticipating the next wave, the next new virus, and they're already bracing for either a booster to help the vaccine they've already taken work through their body and fend off the virus, or another vaccine. Whether they call it a vaccine or a booster, it's rather immaterial in that it's a chemical adjustment that you're trying to force your body to go through to counter the debilitating effects, the respiratory, etc., effects of the virus. So there are going to be times when you do need a chemical cocktail when it's your life is threatened. But if we could at least alter our lifestyle so that we give our immune system to work naturally, then I think that's a better course. We always have medicines that are inorganic that as a last resort, and certainly they do work and they have saved many lives, but I do not feel it's wise in the long run to make that our first choice and to only promote vaccines and forget about our own natural immune system and take on a years-long, life's-long journey through better health and more physical activity. So Good. I appreciate your input on this, Kurt. I think it's important, and hopefully people will think about the points that we've both made. The second thing I wanted to talk about, the main thing was I came across a site on YouTube called the Academy of Ideas, and I've seen a couple of their videos. One of them, which I thought was pretty good, was an expose on the Stoics. And I forget the Roman statesman who was a Stoic. But Stoic is basically a person who has principles and stands by those principles regardless of the trends that local society is taking or engaged upon. And the video was pretty good. The visuals were actually paintings from the Roman period 2,000 years ago, or less. And the Academy of Ideas, the title of this was, how do you deal with a quote-unquote sick society? When I hear sick society, I'm not thinking of a society that has COVID. I'm thinking of a society that has mental issues, and we certainly have a very visible percentage of people that are suffering from mental illness and that are not able to take care of themselves and are actually a threat to others. So I watched this program, and I liked the graphics because the people who put this video together for the Academy of Ideas used classical paintings and adjusted them. I guess there's a way you can get away with this legally, taking somebody like a Matisse or a Cornet or Goya and adjusting their paintings to fit your narrative. But anyway, that's what they did. I thought it was clever. I don't 100% agree with the message, especially the last part of the video. We're going to see 8 minutes and 42 seconds. The narrator relies on the thoughts of Václav Havel, who was a dissident in Czechoslovakia during the Cold War. And after the Velvet Revolution in 90 or 91, where Czechoslovakia or Czech Republic became independent, and he was the first president. I thought it would be interesting to hear him, and then I'm going to give my comments as to what he says regarding a parallel society that lives within multifaceted country. So if we could start that Academy of Ideas video, and we're going to run it for 8 minutes and 42 seconds. And it deals with the immersion of a parallel society within a particular country. And we can talk about the United States in this case. So if we could roll that.
Alexander Solzhenitsyn, reflecting on the Soviet Union's descent into totalitarian rule in the mid-20th century, and all the things that could have been done to prevent it, wrote the following. If we didn't love freedom enough, and even more, we had no awareness of the real situation, we hurried to submit. We submitted with pleasure. We purely and simply deserved everything that happened afterward. The 20th century clearly shows that totalitarianism is not a solution to any problem, but a social ill of the most horrific kind. More innocent men, women, and children were killed by the totalitarian regimes of the 20th century than by natural disasters, pandemics, or even the 2 world wars. If, therefore, we are unfortunate enough to be living in a world flirting with the sickness of totalitarianism, what can we do to escape? In this video, relying on the insights of those who studied and lived under totalitarian rule, we are going to explore what is called the forward escape from the control of the cruel and twisted minds of would-be totalitarians. To understand what this form of escape entails, we will contrast it with two other ways to escape from the hardships of living through an attempted totalitarian takeover: the backward escape and the physical escape. The backward escape entails dulling one's awareness of the reality and precariousness of one's situation through the use of drugs and alcohol, or by zoning out in front of screens for hours on end. The backward escape can provide short-term relief to feelings of anxiety, depression, and boredom, but the more one relies on such activities, the more one's mental health deteriorates. Furthermore, the backward escape does nothing to prevent the rise of totalitarianism, as it promotes docility, passivity, and apathy, all traits that make people more manipulable and controllable, or as Dr. Joost Meerlo explained in his book on totalitarianism. The cult of passivity and so-called relaxation is one of the most dangerous developments of our times. Essentially, it represents a camouflage pattern, the double wish not to see the dangers and challenges of life and not to be seen. Silent, lonely relaxation with alcohol, sweets, or the television screen may soothe the mind into a passivity that may gradually make it vulnerable to the seductive ideology of some feared enemy. Denying the danger of totalitarianism through passivity may gradually surrender to its blandishments those who were initially afraid of it. An alternative to the backward escape is the physical escape, which is to relocate to a place that offers more freedom. This form of escape has many benefits, for given that we have one chance at life, why not live somewhere absent the stifling control of corrupt and power-hungry politicians and bureaucrats? But there are problems with this form of escape. Firstly, for many people, it is not practical to pack up and move to a new land. Furthermore, if we live at a time when the rise of tyranny is a global phenomenon, the practicality of the physical escape diminishes further, as the sought-after pockets of freedom are few and far between. What is more, if totalitarianism is permitted to proliferate, the places that are free now may not remain so for long. Running away, like escaping backward, is not the ideal solution to the rise of totalitarianism. Instead, the solution is to escape forward into a new and better reality. What does the forward escape entail? To answer this question, we need to dispel with the notion that totalitarianism can be defeated through compliance. Many people cede to the commands of would-be totalitarians, because they believe that so doing is the quickest means to return to some semblance of normality. But this is a cowardly and ignorant way to act. For compliance only emboldens totalitarian regimes, a point emphasized by the political philosopher Hannah Arendt in her book The Origins of Totalitarianism. The most characteristic aspect of totalitarian terror is that it is let loose when all organized opposition has died down, and the totalitarian ruler knows that he no longer need be afraid. Stalin started his gigantic purges not in 1928 when he conceded, "We have internal enemies," but in 1934 when all former opponents had confessed their errors, and Stalin himself at the 17th Party Congress declared, "There is nothing more to prove and, it seems, no one to fight." Compliance is the food that feeds totalitarians. Compliance is not, and never will be, the path back to some form of normality. Rather, non-compliance and civil disobedience are essential to counter the rise of totalitarian rule. But in addition to resistance, a forward escape into a reality absent the sickness of totalitarian rule requires the construction of a parallel society. A parallel society serves two main purposes. It offers pockets of freedom to those rejected by the totalitarian system or who refuse to participate in it, and it forms the foundation for a new society that can grow out of the ashes of the destruction wrought by the totalitarians. Or as Václav Havel, a dissident under the communist rule of Czechoslovakia, explains in his book The Power of the Powerless. When those who have decided to live within the truth have been denied any direct influence on the existing social structures, not to mention the opportunity to participate in them, and when these people begin to create what I have called the independent life of society, this independent life begins of itself to become structured in a certain way. These parallel structures do not grow out of a theoretical vision of systemic change. There are no political sects involved, but from the aims of life and the authentic needs of real people. There are innumerable ways to contribute to the construction of a parallel society. One can build technologies that promote freedom, or agoristic economic institutions that further voluntary exchange. One can run a business that resists implementing unjust laws or mandates, or one can create media or educational institutions that counter the lies and propaganda of the state. Or one can create music, literature, or artwork that counters the staleness of totalitarian culture. The parallel society is a decentralized and voluntary alternative to the centralized and coercive control of the totalitarian society, and as Havel explains, one of the most important tasks the dissident movements have set themselves is to support and develop parallel social structures. What else are those initial attempts at social self-organization than the efforts of a certain part of society to rid itself of the self-sustaining aspects of totalitarianism, and, thus, to extricate itself radically from its involvement in the totalitarian system? And as he explains further, it would be quite wrong to understand the parallel structures in the parallel society as a retreat into a ghetto, and as an act of isolation, addressing itself only to the welfare of those who had decided on such a course. The ultimate phase of this process is the situation in which the official structures simply begin withering away and dying off, to be replaced by new structures that have evolved from below and are put together in a fundamentally different way. The construction of a parallel society, however, is not merely a long-term solution to totalitarian destruction, but also serves to counter the rise of totalitarian rule. For the act of building parallel social structures reveals that not everyone will just roll over and submit to total state control, and as was noted by Hannah Arendt, this helps keep the would-be totalitarians in check. This process also counters the social atomization that comes with totalitarian rule by promoting voluntary communal bonds between those who cherish freedom. And as an added benefit for those who partake in this process, it can serve as a healthy vehicle to escape the day-to-day feelings of anxiety, boredom, and depression that accompany living in a world teetering with a descent into totalitarianism. For if we pick a goal to help in the construction of the parallel society and work towards it,
I hope everybody appreciated that short course in Art 101. If you haven't been to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York recently, well, you can consider yourself having been there. So, Kurt, beyond the art to what the gentleman was saying, your thoughts. I found it interesting that they started with Alexander Solzhenitsyn and his take on why the totalitarianism of Joseph Stalin had maintained or was successful in maintaining itself for so long. But anyway, I'd be interested in first hearing your thoughts.
Well, I pretty much agree with what they're saying. I mean, basically, a totalitarian society does foster itself for stagnation, with no individual freedoms, and basically the importance of dissidents and differing opinions being publicly expounded certainly will help to keep a society clear. I can't think of any totalitarian society that's survived long term, except we do see them now in some places like North Korea and so forth, but I can't believe that somewhere down the road it would end as well. So, don't know. I think every basic human wants to have freedom of his thought and action, so it seems kind of inherent that would, somehow prevail long term.
Yes. I found it interesting that while he excoriated the power exercised by the tyrant, in this case he cited Joseph Stalin, who was in power up until his death in 1953, when supposedly rumors have it he was poisoned. It kind of helped towards the grave. The fellow who came up with the Gulag Archipelago that Solzhenitsyn so accurately describes in his books. One point that Solzhenitsyn makes is that if we live in a totalitarian society and we comply, that we share a general guilt in letting it happen and letting our power be taken from us by a single man or at the head of a single political machine. I remember the quote he said, many times in the Gulag we would talk about why we are here, why the country, Mother Russia, has fallen so far. Why, when the NKVD came knocking on someone's door at 2 o'clock in the morning to carry them off for interrogation and subsequently a trip to the Gulag for anywhere from 10 to 25 to 50 years, depending on the sentence. Why neighbors weren't waiting under the stairs with not necessarily guns, but bats, shovels, anything that could be used as a weapon, and ambush the 3 or 4 NKVD or secret police that were carrying off one of their neighbors. He made the point that if there was more pushback of that nature, the NKVD would have second thoughts about going in that way and openly taking people from their homes, basically to their death, and it would be a death after months of torture during interrogation, unending interrogation periods. Why people didn't push back on a local level, building by building. And he said that might have given the machine pause to reflect and perhaps back off. But as the narrator said, with compliance, that feeds the machine to ask for even more and take even more power and dignity away from people. So you probably heard in the narration that there were allusions to the 20th century, later 20th century, the 20th century that we've known, you and I, sitting in front of a screen, whether it's a television or a computer screen. Do you see parallels between this second society that has arisen or has not arisen in totalitarian states and what I view, and I'll explain shortly, as a second society emerging in our own country? Do you see any relevance between this premise of a second society and the current situation that we're living or experiencing in our own country, Kurt?
I would think certainly. I mean, some of it being scary. I mean, Antifa is one thing that would kind of scare me, but it is a dissident type of approach. But yeah, absolutely. I see a lot of that.
Okay. Are you scared by Antifa, or are you scared also by the type of coverage it gets in the media and borderline promotion?
I would say both.
Yeah, that's...
really, it does seem that the media looks at the sensationalism of it, and that sells. That's how they sell their news time, is through sensationalism. Get people feared, and seems to be a way of life now for American news entertainment, if you want to call it that.
We talked about this. It seems that we are being fed, what do they call it, a diet of bread and circus that they did in the Roman times. If you remember, and you're as much a student of history as I am, one of the ways they pacified people and kept them kind of in line, so to speak, was by entertaining them. And the entertainment was in the Colosseum. And you would see gladiators or races or some poor SOB gradually being killed through some type of sport. All kinds of devilish ways to debase people for entertainment. And during these shows, they would also give out food, hence the bread and circus aspect of keeping people's eye off the ball of what is actually happening. And we have a very sophisticated system, I believe, that whose aim is to follow in the wake of bread and circus and keep people distracted. It's very easy now, and it's frightening as well, because instead of the Colosseum, we have a television set or a computer screen, and not only is it possible to show real, but it's very possible to create the unreal through CGI or computer-generated imagery, so that people don't know what is real, what is fake, and when they're watching the news, are they being entertained or are they being informed? So I'm going to have to cut it there, Kurt, because we've run over. Next week, of course, is the documentary presented at the Opera Movie House on the Square, dealing with the Star Hotel fire, which almost burned down the square. I believe it was also in the dead of winter. And this was decades ago when winters were far more severe. And Mike Smith will be leading us through that. So anybody who wishes to go, 7 o'clock next Thursday. Kurt, if you're interested, you can view it on YouTube if you're free next Thursday. If not, then we'll be back on air the Thursday after that. And of course, we'll be seeing each other Saturday. I'll say this on the air. We're heading down. We're leaving here at 6, so expect us about 8:30, and I'll give you a call as we're getting close. How does that sound?
Super.
All right. And you have any questions, just give me a call or shoot me an email. Email is better. All right, so I wish you and Boris a pleasant evening, and I wish all our viewers a pleasant evening. Have a good weekend, and we'll say "Do svidaniya," goodbye until next time. Cheers.
Just not here.